Good evening, Laura. Well, look, it appears that the president-elect is questioning the legitimacy of an election in which he won.
Trump has tried and will continue to attempt to stay in power any way possible. Over the last 5 years, Tiny Fingers has lied repeatedly about undocumented people voting, with zero proof that it's happening on any level.
Well, tonight, House lawmakers have passed a bill that would change the process of voter registration for federal elections. Under this legislation, voters would need to show proof of citizenship. It would also require states to create a program to remove immigrants who do not have documentation from existing voter rolls. Critics say this could impact millions of eligible voters who don't have easy access to identification documents. It's important to note it is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections.
So Trump issued an executive order that said everyone had to prove they were a citizen before they were allowed to vote. Why? Well, he knows that seniors and immigrants many times don't have the ID because they don't need it or it's expensive to obtain. But then this happened. A judge today blocked Trump from immediately enacting certain changes to how federal elections are run, including adding a proof of citizenship requirement to the federal voter registration form. So, in a 120-page opinion, this judge, she blocked the Trump administration from requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote and ordering that election officials assess the citizenship of anyone who receives public assistance before allowing them to register. You. In her opinion, she wrote, "Our Constitution entrusts Congress and the states, not the president, with the authority to regulate federal elections. No statutory delegation of authority to the executive branch permits the president to short-circuit Congress's deliberate process by executive order." So after Trump issued an executive order last month preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections, 3 separate lawsuits were filed in D.C. federal court to challenge it, including lawsuits by the Democratic National Committee, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and the NAACP. The judge concluded that Trump's unilateral effort to reshape elections exceeds his own authority, noting the Department of Justice offered almost no defense of the president's order. So here's what happened before and led to this decision.
From the campaign trail,
I will secure our election,
to a sweeping executive order.
How simple does that sound? Proof of citizenship, voter ID, one day voting and paper ballots.
President Trump plans to reshape federal elections with a voter ID requirement. Voters in Wisconsin passed a Republican-led effort to enshrine voter ID in the state's constitution, too. And in Congress, GOP reps, along with 4 Democrats, passed the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections. A movement fueled in part by Donald Trump's 2020 election loss and the false claim that American elections have been tainted by widespread fraud. But in Kansas, voters are experiencing deja vu and warning the rest of the country of what could come. The state tried a proof of citizenship law over a decade ago, and for some, it was a fiasco.
Nobody at the time had asked me for any additional proof.
Tad Stricker is a U.S. citizen. In 2014, he moved to Kansas for work, prepared to start a family, and quickly registered to vote.
They just said, "Do you want to register to vote?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Months later on Election Day, he waited in line only to find out he wasn't registered and could only cast a provisional ballot.
So you didn't get any phone calls, no letter in the mail saying, "Hey, this is what's going on. You are not on the rolls."
No, there was absolutely no communication.
Stricker was purged from the Kansas voter rolls, and his ballot never counted after a 2011 state law that mandated proof of citizenship for anyone registering to vote, meaning voters had to present documents like a passport or birth certificate.
It was humiliating. It was almost like I was being treated that I did something wrong, and I had no idea what was going on at the time.
The ACLU represented Stricker and other residents going up against Chris Kobach, then the Secretary of State, now a Trump ally. He was a household name as an architect of election security measures and the push to keep undocumented immigrants from voting. Those studies show they almost never do.
Not only was it almost unanimous among Republican legislators, more than 2/3 of Democrat legislators voted for our election security law.
A federal judge found 12.4% of eligible Kansans who tried to register between 2013 and 2015 were blocked, about 31,000 voters. Kobach's team says that 94% of those people ultimately proved their citizenship and got on the rolls, and says his team identified 44 non-citizens who had improperly registered, but most of them did not attempt to vote, and those incidents spanned several election cycles.
So today's decision will freak Trump out. He'll call the judge a lunatic, a communist, a Marxist, and demand she's impeached. But as everyone except his thumb-faced Fox friends and the millions who can't read without moving their lips can see, it's all bullshit. Remember when Trump won in 2016 but lost the popular vote? Trump said he won the popular vote because 3 million illegals voted in California.
But before he left, he unleashed on Twitter, saying, quote, "In addition to winning the Electoral College in a landslide, I won the popular vote, if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally." Now, we should note, Mr. Trump did not elaborate on what illegal voting he was referring to, and there's no indication of widespread fraud that could have affected the outcome.
But here's their argument. If you need ID to buy Sudafed, why not to vote? Okay, there's no mention of Sudafed in the Constitution, but under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, a state is not allowed to pass laws that unduly burden the right to vote. And let's add to that what I've said before. There's absolutely no evidence anywhere that undocumented Americans are willing to jeopardize their status by breaking the law and voting in elections they have little or no consequence to them. As you saw in that video, the state of Wisconsin claimed that a voter identification law was necessary for, quote, detecting and preventing in-person voter impersonation fraud. Evidence presented to the court showed that virtually no voter impersonation occurs in Wisconsin, finding literally no examples of this type of fraud in more than a decade of elections. The judge said that cases of potential voter impersonation fraud occur so infrequently that no rational person familiar with relevant facts could be concerned about them. Similar results have been found in 40 other states. Kansas and Wisconsin also said the law was necessary for promoting confidence in the integrity of the electoral process. But no empirical evidence shows that voter ID laws like the one in Wisconsin actually increase confidence in the electoral process. Significant evidence, in fact, shows the opposite, that such laws decrease many voters' confidence in the system, since the law is seen as a way to prevent certain type of voters from casting their ballot. And Wisconsin said the law was necessary for detecting and deterring other types of voter fraud. Again, according to the research, ID proponents showed no evidence that an ID could prevent these other types of fraud, nor could she, in her words, think of any way that it could. A felon who was voting illegally, for instance, could easily have an ID, and no poll worker could tell from that ID that the person was an invalid voter.
News conference on Monday, he says, to release what he calls, quote, an irrefutable report that would prove his false claims of election fraud in Georgia, despite all the responsible officials in Georgia, elected officials, courts, saying there was no stolen election there. It's unclear what evidence Trump has, why it might not have been presented in any of the court cases he's filed in the last couple of years, but Donald Trump's going to do what Donald Trump does. Trump's charged now with 13 counts in Atlanta, including racketeering. The indictment putting him atop a, quote, criminal organization.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
As we witnessed in 2020, much of this sentiment is around undocumented people, of whom most are Hispanic. Republicans could pave their way to citizenship, which would be a good idea, as many of them would vote Republican because Republicans got behind it.
I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally.
But that was almost 50 years ago, and Republicans can't or don't get it. And I'll say it one more time. Undocumented people commit fewer crimes, have fewer divorces, attend church more regularly than 85% of citizens, average 6 days a week of work, and would vote were they allowed, but don't because they're not. And oh yeah, they contribute over $9 billion annually to Medicare and Social Security, but they're not allowed to access it. And here's the crazy part. 95 million eligible voters didn't vote in 2024, and Trump won. I think it's safe to say Republicans don't want to f with that.
Goddamn right.
Terrorizing our communities.
Are your leaders incompetent, unqualified people compromising national security?
Yes, yes, yes!
Elon eating the dogs.
Who's benefiting? What billionaire just got richer?
They had what?
Bloated and fat and disgusting.
I like that.
We're a nation that speaks English.
Look, if something like they say that thing's dark ugly.
I don't want to talk about this stuff.
Am I wrong?
Yes!
Tick-tock!
You're in a lot of trouble, Donnie.
I think he's crazy.
I'm Chip Franklin.